For Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, et al. Tears collapse on top of your skin like heavy rain. There is wailing all around you when you are born. It is a good thing. We celebrate the hurried and uncertain attempts to breathe. We cradle you and caress your brown skin. Momentarily, we forget the trauma inherent in your blood. When you are born, it is a good thing. We celebrate the ancestors' prayer manifest in the flesh. Momentarily, we forget about the trauma inherent in your blood, our blood. We imagine you living past 23, the ancestors' prayer manifest in the flesh, a future where someone with skin like yours, like soot, like soil, never meets the barrel of a white man's gun, our blood. We imagine you living past 23, anomaly, a future where someone with skin like yours, like soot, like soil, never meets the barrel of a white man's gun. Our dreams constantly clipped at the wings. We black, no anomaly. Lucky to be alive. We live as who it could have been. Our dreams constantly clipped at the wings. We black. No, any moment is one in which a white man might want to claim scared and shoot. We lucky to be alive. We live as who it could have been. Stomaching survivors' guilt like a bad secret only. We know any moment is one in which a white man might want to claim scared and shoot. You did not deserve this. Stomaching survivors' guilt like a bad secret only. We know so much of us dies with each of you, and you did not deserve this. The hurried and uncertain attempts to breathe. We cradle you and caress your brown skin. Much of us dies with each of you. Tears collapse on top of your skin like heavy rain. There is wailing all around you.
What an incredible message. Thanks to Tish Jones for sharing those powerful words. Good afternoon and welcome to YWCA Minneapolis Community Town Hall. I am Tanya Jackman-Hampton, Chief People and Culture Officer at Hennepin Healthcare, and I am honored and delighted that YWCA asked me to be the moderator for today's event. We are at a critical time in history. The movement to advance racial justice has renewed energy, and at the same time, the barriers are big and the opponents are many. Today's conversation will center the voices of Black leaders in our community to address how this movement, or how this moment in time is unique, the impact that politicizing the movement has on these leading efforts, and what to anticipate for the road ahead. Thank you to all for joining us. Before we dive into the conversation, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. For those of you turning in via Zoom, the chat box is open for you to engage with one another. A member of the YWCA Minneapolis team will be moderating the conversation. We hope you share some thoughtful words with one another. We're excited to hear from you. The event is also streaming to YWCA Minneapolis Facebook page. For audience members joining us there, we hope you can connect with each other as well. We ask that all audience members are respectful towards one another and our panelists as well. There will be reserved thought time towards the end of the panel for discussion from the audience with Q&A. For those on Zoom, I encourage each of you to add any questions you may have using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you're watching on Facebook, please share any questions in the comments section. We will do our best to answer any and as many questions as possible. This entire event is being recorded and will be available on YWCA Minneapolis website after the event. With the housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. At this point, I think we can call and all agree that 2020 has been challenging. Between COVID-19 pandemic, the polarized division within our country, the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, to add even some of the announcement that has happened yet even today on Breonna Taylor, and so many others, and then the unmonstrable losses of heroes and leaders like John Lewis and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It seems like each day brings another heavy and proud event. Over the past 6 months, there has been so much for us to process and respond to. We would be remiss not to acknowledge that these challenges are disproportionately impacting the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities as a direct result of race-based systems of oppression. So, before introducing the panel today, we'd like to check in with each of you joining us virtually. And we'd like to know how you are doing during this year of complete uncertainty. Using a poll, we'd ask that each of you share 3 words to answer the question, how are you? Really, how are you? To participate, please take out your phone and go to menti.com and enter the code 6802954. Once you're there, you will be prompted and add your 1-word answers to the question. Again, that's menti.com, and code is 6802954. The direct link can also be found in the chat in Zoom and in the comment section on Facebook. As the results are coming in, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Eliza Darius is a community organizer and founder of Darius Consulting Group. After being sentenced to natural life prison as a juvenile, Eliza fought to turn his life around. Though studying law and working with his state-appointed counsel, he successfully fought to get his life sentence reversed on appeal. Upon being released, Eliza became a business owner, consultant, educator, organizer, and motivational speaker. In 2016, he founded Darius Consulting Group as a means to deepen political engagement in impacted communities and to help local governments craft policies that center the voice of community. He was recently appointed by Governor Tim Walz to State Board of Public Defense and works as a field organizer with the American Civil Liberties Union of Minnesota and coordinates the ACLU Minnesota Smart Justice Campaign. Next, Leslie E. Redman, president of Minneapolis NAACP. At the age of 20 years old, she had lunch with President Barack Obama. At the age of 25, Leslie became the youngest president of the Minneapolis NAACP and has been recognized for both locally and nationally circumstances. Now, at the humble age of 27 years old, she obtained her Juris Doctorate as well as her Master's in Business Administration. Recently, she passed the Minnesota Bar examination on her first attempt. Leslie is often the center of the civil rights advocacy in the Twin Cities and is most notably known for her Don't Complain, Activate DCA campaign. Dr. Yahuru Williams is distinguished. He's the next up, University Chair and Professor of History and founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas of St. Paul, Minnesota. Dr. Williams received his PhD from Howard University, HBCU,
okay.
in 1998, and is the author and editor and co-editor of 8 books. Dr. Williams has appeared on a variety of local and national radio television programs, proudly serves as a board of the YWCA St. Paul, and is presently finishing a new book titled The Whipping Post, Lynching, Capital Punishment, and Jim Crow Justice in Delaware, 1865 and 1965, under contract with Cambridge University Press. I want to say thank you all for joining us today. I want to also add that I feel really connected to each and every one of you. I've been in different circles, different connection points, and I'm so proud to be sitting here with you to have this conversation today. Thank you so much. Personally, I'll say HBCU because I went to Clark Atlanta University. Leslie, you and I just watch and see you glow, and it's amazing all of that you have accomplished. And right, from a consulting perspective, we link in so many different ways, Yahuru, and I'm so thrilled about that. So thank you. Using an interactive poll, we will start by asking the audience to really share the 3 words that they got into and understand how are you doing? So there's a word cloud that really presents to all of us, right, the emotions that people are feeling. And what sticks out for me might be different for you. I'll just add and say that people are tired. And I know I'm tired. I know that as I even think and reflect about our conversation, as I think about what's happening right now, as I think about what has happened over the last 9 months and even back to May, which is only a few months back, there's been so much that has gone on and impacted our emotions that creates tiredness, creates situations where people are angry and they're frustrated. That's what is being expressed. I am excited to see that people are hopeful. That's amazing, right? So thank you for sharing that. So panelists, before we dig into the prepared questions, I'd like to ask each of you, how are you doing? How are you doing? I know for me, just as you're simmering your thoughts, I try to ride the line between angry and doing what I know is necessary where I can. I know I can't do it all, and I am committed to the latter, maybe to be said unpopularly, but I will say it until I can't breathe, until I don't have the ability to do something. I'm committed. So that's where I am. How would you like to share?
I have to agree with you. I think we lost an icon this summer in Congressman John Lewis. In his final letter to the American people, to Black Lives Matter activists in particular, but to the American people in general, about getting in good trouble, necessary trouble, was like feeding the soul. I'm honored to sit here today with Eliza and Tanya, and of course, Leslie, who every time I'm in her presence, I feel empowered. And I think we have to stay in that space. Of course, we're tired, but there is something tremendous about this moment, and we have an opportunity really to make substantive change, and that's what keeps me energized and focused.
Absolutely. Thank you. Leslie.
So my siblings, they always make fun of me because this summer after Brother George Floyd was murdered, there was this interview that ended up on CNN. And I said, I'm exhausted, right? And so every time I say I'm exhausted, they're like, we know, because that was the first thing you said on your interview. But I think it's true. You know, Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And, you know, I stand here thinking about Breonna Taylor. You know, I say I am Breonna Taylor. I'm 28. I'm 28 now. And I'm a young Black millennial woman, and Breonna Taylor could have definitely been me, right? And so I don't take it for granted that I'm sitting here today and she's not. And her mom, Tamika Palmer, has to live without a daughter. Her sister has to live without a sister. Her boyfriend has to live without a girlfriend. So my heart goes out to her family and George Floyd and so many others. But like Dr. Yahuru Williams, I'm also very optimistic and I'm very inspired. And you know, even when you were reading out our bios, Tanya, I was, you know, I couldn't help but to smile because we are Black excellence. You know, the reality of the situation is a lot of us aren't supposed to be sitting up here today, but by the grace of God, we are. And so I believe that where there's a will, there's a way. And so I'm very much so still inspired, and I believe that we're going to make it through.
Thank you, Leslie. And Eliza, I referred to you earlier. Did you note?
Huh?
I said referred to you earlier as Uhuru, and I don't know if you noted. I like calling it real, and I want to apologize for that.
That's okay.
Eliza, please share with
Thank
us.
you.
How are you doing? You're welcome.
You know, my emotions vacillate, you know, continually from one moment to the next. I do feel blessed to be in these moments. I feel as though this is a finishing season. I'm really grateful for a lot of the work that, you know, the foremothers and the forefathers that went before us have laid down to get us to this moment. I'm also a millennial, and I really do feel like this generation is specifically geared towards putting periods towards a lot of the work. And it can be stressful in these moments and in these times because it may seem as if the enemy is winning, but I feel as though the enemy is in his final throes. And typically, in scenarios like that, the response is ferocious because it recognizes it's nearing the end. And so I'm grateful to be in these moments, in these days, these finishing days. I call it a finishing season. You know, it's difficult, it's tough work, but we're built for it. And I'm really grateful that this generation is a fierce generation. This is a generation that has absolutely no problem reaching back to the generations that went before it for advice, for information, to figure out what happened so that we can figure out, we don't want to redo or recreate or you know, walk down roads that have already been traveled, whereas we can learn lessons from the past and finish some of this work. So I'm grateful to be in a finishing season. I'm frustrated at the same time, you know, laughter, crying. You know, I don't typically know how to feel from one moment to the next, but the overarching emotion and feeling is gratefulness. And like I said, it's a finishing season.
Wow. All three of you, I really appreciate your comments. And the one thing that's coming up for me is I really feel like our work, in some respects, is that sort of modern day civil rights work, that we're building off of the work that has happened in the past. And we do have the capability, based on what has happened in our past, to be able to reach further and, right, in some respects, take no mess. Be willing to address it. So thank you, all of you. We want to also move on to questions. So thank you for sharing. And the murder of George Floyd, the protest in our city has calls for change within our police department, but a spotlight on Minneapolis over the past few months. As a community leaders that you are, how has the attention put on Minneapolis impacted you and the work that you are doing? And if I can just add a little bit of a snapshot, I'm from here, Minnesota. My kids heard all their lives, it's cold, I need to get out of Minnesota. And while I am really disheartened by what has happened to Mr. Floyd, George Floyd, I also will say it brought me back 360. It brought me clear on, this is my hometown, and I need to get really connected even more so to the legacy or to the community and make sure that I'm doing what I can to support. So I'd love to turn it over to you, Yoharu.
Thank you. You know, I think it's a powerful moment. I was on my way to St. John's University. I accepted a position as dean there. And so I was actually leaving Minnesota because I'd become frustrated with the culture here. It is a very beautiful place, but it's hard to know where people stand. And there was no sense of immediacy around issues of race. Coming from the East Coast and watching people like Leslie in action with Jamar Clark and watching what was playing out here in terms of racial justice, you get one perspective, and then when you're on the ground, you suddenly realize it's a different ballgame. So, you know, I was prepared to leave, and then watching that video, I had such a visceral reaction. And my first book was called Black Politics, White Power, which was on the civil rights movement and Black power movements in New Haven, Connecticut. The original title was No Haven. And I called it that because you had Southern migrants who left Southern communities and came north with the expectation that they had arrived in the promised land. And when you leave the southern side of the plantation, you go to the northern side, and the northern side is no better, as one of the interview subjects put it. You can't go to Canada, you stand and fight. This was a stand and fight moment. And I think in a way, when you talked about a finishing season, which I think is very powerful, it was this opportunity to reevaluate my own personal decisions on the basis of what we can do here. It's a tremendous opportunity in the Twin Cities because this is a laboratory. You've got the right mixture of people, progressive ideas, organizations that are uniquely positioned to take on this work. At the same time, you got the right generation that's not turning back. I like to distinguish between movements and moments, and we've had many moments in our history which have caused us to reflect on the pain and trauma that people of color have suffered. This is a movement moment, and that's why I'm so excited about it, and that's why I decided to stay. I think this generation in particular is going to heed the advice of Congressman John Lewis, and there won't be a turning back. And I think, in fact, if we don't, as you put it, put the period at the end of the sentence, certainly we're going to be rewriting a whole new sentence. And that's a good place to be, and that's a good place to be, to think about the work that we're doing right now. We get to reimagine and transform in the process.
Absolutely. I want to be honest and say, like, I'd love for this to be a dynamic conversation. So if either one of you want to jump in and not in an order, we can do that.
I just wanted to get up and clap. I was like literally holding myself back.
Yeah.
Like,
so please
really
jump in and We have a few questions, you know, to go through, and so would love to hear in whatever order that you want to go in terms of each of you speaking to those questions.
In terms of how this moment has impacted my work, you know, I would say that it compelled me to have a much more nationalistic view and nationalistic lens. I work for the ACLU, but you know, I was pretty hyper local, and this isn't just a local issue. You know, many organizations, many individuals across the country were reaching out, and my typical reaction prior to this event, prior to this murder, was to be a little resistant because, you know, we have local politics, there's a local history, there's a lot that people really don't understand about how things operate and function in the Twin Cities. And so, you know, what may work in one place won't necessarily translate quite so well here. But I really had to burst through that because this moment was bigger than me. It was bigger than us. It was bigger than Minnesota. It was bigger than America. This was a worldwide moment. And so it really forced me to really begin nationalizing my perspective, really beginning to convene calls from national partners to really help to advise. I mean, in a deep and committed way that I felt really uncomfortable with. I have a little bit of a control freak in me a little bit,
Yeah.
but the perspectives that our national partners brought was really significant. And then I also had to, you know, really get really grassroots. And there were some particular moments after George Floyd's murder that really called for a really grassroots, like boots on the ground kind of response. And I had began migrating a little bit towards being a little bit more in various different halls of power, trying to negotiate on our community's behalf. This wasn't a time for that. This was a time to put boots right back on the ground and like really plug in ways that for me was really refreshing and reminded me, you know, of where I needed to be and what voices needed to be centered the most.
That is so true, and you're bringing me in a moment where, you know, there was no time to be scared. And if I were scared, too bad. And my daughter called me and she was out protesting. I was fearful as a mother, but I knew she was doing the right thing, right? And I told her, drop the pin so that I can make sure I know where you are.
Right.
Because that gave me a sense of security.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Our enemy was here and our enemy wasn't scared, so.
No, right.
That's true.
Right.
And so one of the things that I said was that COVID-19 shut the world down, right? And George Floyd woke the world back up, right? And he brought us back outside,
Yes.
right? People weren't getting on airplanes. People wasn't even stepping outside their doorstep. And now all of a sudden you have thousands of people joining together because we realized a lot of us were surviving a global pandemic, but it was white supremacy that had its knee on our neck, right? And, you know, for me, what George Floyd did was he made it very clear why God brought me to Minnesota. Because, you know, for years now, I've been like really going back and forth with God. Like, why am I here? You know, I'm from the inner city of Washington, D.C., born and raised. I spent 4 years in Miami, and I came to Minnesota in 2014. And that was the year when Mike Brown was murdered in Ferguson, right? And I feel like in Minnesota, there was this arrogance of, oh, when Trayvon Martin happened in 2012, that was Florida. When Mike Brown happened, that was Ferguson. And then you had Jamar Clark happen in 2015. The summer of, you had Philando Castile happen, but still not really seeing the justice that you need. And then Justine DeMond, a white woman from South Minneapolis, was really the first one to grab, well, I would say Philando definitely grabbed national attention, but she was the first one to actually get some justice in Minnesota, right?
Right.
And it so happened to be a Black Muslim Somali man. And I think God was really using that moment to reveal some of the complexities of Minnesota and some of these disparities, and not just numbers, but in reality. And George Floyd, like, I feel like all of that had been building up to this moment. basically, I told you so, right? For me, that's all it is. It's like, welcome to the club,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Because we've been saying that Minnesota has this knee on our neck. And what I hope is that people don't just use this as a scapegoat opportunity, right? Is that this is not an isolated situation, but businesses and corporations, you all have your knees on the necks of Black people too. The public education system has its knees on the necks of Black people. The healthcare system has its knees on the necks of Black people as well. It's not just the police system. And I think what was different about this, and I definitely want to make sure I give shout out to one, Stephen Jackson, right? Because he brought a national spotlight. The fact that him and George Floyd was so close and he had this national outreach. And at that first protest, you saw all of these basketball players and football players and Jamie Foxx and everyone. That did something different. And then you had Tamika Mallory come. And so now you're looking at from George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, right? And elevating a Black woman. Brother George Floyd also created a platform because Breonna Taylor happened in March. And we didn't know about it. And if there wasn't a George Floyd, I don't even think we would know Breonna Taylor's name. So this is just so big, it's so deep, and it's like only God could be doing it. And I really believe he's using this moment.
Leslie, thank you so much. You know, for a Minneapolis for a Minnesotan I have been frustrated and caught up in the web of the years that we've been in these disparity issues. And the way that you have summarized it is just powerful to elevate that we as a state, we were poised for this opportunity to happen. For it to be a learning and an experience across the nation, across the world. And it's just.
And also, can I just add, Chief Arredondo, right? Because had Jamar Clark not happened, we wouldn't probably have the first African-American police chief, Chief Arredondo, right? Had Justine DeMont happened, we know for sure we wouldn't have a Chief Arredondo because then you would have never got rid of the last chief, right? And so when I say we've been positioned to have a first African-American Attorney General, Keith Ellison, who does it the right way, not like Attorney General Daniel Cameron, but does it the right way and holds people accountable. This moment has been preordained.
I'm waiting for you to write that book.
Don't complain, activate. It's coming, people. It's coming.
Wait for you to write that book. Thank you so much. Yeah, good. So media framing of lawful and peaceful protest as an action that will lead to widespread lawlessness and chaos and fear-mongering and racist tactics. This is our next question. We've seen how this narrative has become politicized and harmful for the individuals leading in the calls for justice. How do you personally deal with these false narratives and the barriers they put up to organizing and the harm that they cause? Whoever would like to chime in first.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on where you left off, Leslie, because I agree with you. It was interesting for me. There are two videos that frame this moment from Minnesota. There's Philando Castile, which the world watched, and for whatever reason walked away not compelled that that was an act of police brutality, streamed live on Facebook, and yet people somehow were able to divert their gaze just enough to say, well, that's not what we thought it was. And then there was George Floyd, which thanks to a global pandemic, you couldn't avert your gaze and you couldn't walk away and say, well, I didn't see that. At the same time, there's a playbook to how, there's a rhythm to the way this goes. And what we saw in the immediate aftermath is people come out and predictably say, well, these are not peaceful protesters. Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. This has moved beyond the realm of talking about police brutality. What does defund the police mean? And it reminds me of Ralph Ellison's book, The Invisible Man, where he says, you know, we're invisible simply because people refuse to see us. When they see us, they see only themselves, our surroundings, or figments of their imagination. The only way that you could watch a man shot dead on television in his car is he's talking to police with his girlfriend in the car and assume that he's not a human being is if he's a figment of your imagination or you only see his surroundings. George Floyd made that inescapable for us. At the same time, what troubles me about the way that activists have been treated is, and I want to emphasize this in particular with regard to your work, Leslie, Black women have been invisible not only in struggle, but in discourse about struggle. This is a moment where we would not have a national Black Lives Matter movement if it weren't for the three sisters that came together to form Black Lives Matter. And the hyper-invisibility, almost in and of itself, becomes an opportunity for us to revisit the way that we talk about police brutality, even things like the talk, where this has to be a conversation that encompasses the Black family. When George Floyd is murdered, it is not just the murder of George Floyd, it's the impact on the family, on the community. As you said eloquently, his a mother, his children, you know, everyone who's impacted. When people put such emphasis on, he was calling out to his mother who had passed, to me, that was a family moment to recognize that that's the pain that's inflicted on a community. So to sum up, again, as someone who studies the Black Panthers, this is not something that we haven't seen before in our history. This is the playbook that always is used to justify repression against legitimate protest. I would hope that people would be focused and understand the importance of historical recovery and recognizing that this work remains important and we can't get distracted with labels. Look at what people are doing in the streets. Look at what they're advocating for. When they're saying defund the police and they're saying we want to put that money toward healthcare, we want to talk about responses to homelessness. And they're really talking about dismantling systemic oppression, what I like to call the 6 degrees of segregation, of which Jim Crow justice, police brutality is the most intractable, but in some senses the most obvious. What about housing? What about education? What about access to places of public accommodation? What about dealing with unfair labor practices and the denial of the right to vote? Collectively, they become the blueprint, the work that we have to do in order to put ourselves in a place where we can fulfill the promise of American democracy, which is not in any way intangible for African Americans, for people of color in this country.
Definitely.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Yoru.
I would just build on, and Dr. Uhuru Williams, you know, I really appreciate and respect you, and I appreciate that you appreciate and respect me, right? And I think that that is huge, and people like you and Dr. Atika Tyner, that's how we get past this misinformation, because for too long there's been a divide, right? You have the activists, you have the people on the ground, and you have the Black intellects who they respect, and we play respectability politics. And, you know, for me, it's very important because I believe that if I wasn't the president of Minneapolis NAACP, there may have been a different narrative, right? I was very intentional in that interview about saying that this is not looting that you're witnessing. You're witnessing a global uprising, right in front of your eyes. And I can say that too because I'm on the ground. I can also say that a lot of these buildings that are being burnt were burned by white men. And now the data's coming out, but I could tell you that because when I was on the ground, I could tell you that this was very professionally done. And these young people don't have the tools and skills to be able to do that, right? But if you're not on the ground, if you really don't understand what's going on, then there's going to be a disconnect and that misinformation is going to be there. I'm thankful for social media, which has helped us to be able to get our story across. I remember being on West Broadway, you know, making sure it didn't burn down and being able to give people updates. I didn't have to wait on major media outlets because the media never accurately depicts the stories that's going on in our community. And that also fuels misinformation, right? And so I think that there's a number of ways that we do it, but collaboration is key. And bridging these gaps, I think, is what's going to do it the most, because we cannot be divided in these moments.
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Eliza, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would say powerfully put by both. Actually, I see that bridge there. This kind of looks like the bridge.
It does.
It does. It does.
So narratives are critical. Narratives are important, and making sure that we are helping to shape and frame what these narratives are going to be is also critical. We have to learn lessons from past incidents and past prosecutions or lack thereof. And we have to make sure that we are getting ahead of some of the messaging. We already know that one of the first things that they were going to do was to demonize Brother George Floyd, turn him into a monster and everything that we should hate. And because of that, some of us decided that we were going to convene. So right now there is a group of communicators convened. This is dope people like Georgia Fort, Janae Bates, people like Louis Blaze. These are great communicators within our community. I had made a decision that, you know what? I don't know much about media framing. That's not my lane. But what I do have is great relationships. So I reached out to a number of these fantastic communicators, and we were able to convene about 15 communicators together. And for the past month, they have been working on comms packages to begin to reshape and reframe the narrative. Over the past week, they've been shooting footage of people who knew George Floyd as a man, as a person, as a brother, as an uncle, as a coworker. And these videos are going to drip out over the next few months, just drip out, talking about the humanity of the person, that he was a person, a real person who mattered. And so us making sure that we don't allow them to dehumanize us, other us, And as Leslie was saying, are making the determination that we were going to take media into our own hands. We're not going to wait for outlets to put out, you know, the messaging that we want, the frames that we want. We're going to do it ourselves. We're going to have dope influencers, people like Les, who we have a creed that influencers are going to all cite and recite. It's going to be probably like in black and white. It's like a 30-second creed. You're going to see that creed coming all around. It's going to be a creed challenge, as a matter of fact, right? Whereas community is making a determination, we're going to make sure that George Floyd is humanized in the eyes of the public, because a lot of times these things are tried in public and we have to sit back and wait and receive. Now we've made a determination we can give just as good as we get.
Yeah. Yes. That is really heartwarming to hear that those stories are going to continue. Hennepin Healthcare, right, being a care provider at which was a vessel that had the honor to support Dr. George Floyd. I'm looking at doctors and I'm saying doctor, I'm thinking of myself. But the idea of a storytelling and carrying that forward, that's just amazing.
Yeah.
And allows him
to
continue and to continue to leverage, right, how that story can be so different.
Yeah.
I love the way you put that, because wounds produce narratives. So to allow somebody else to tell the story lets them double the wound, double the injury to the community. And taking control of that, we get to frame the context and explain to people what that pain and trauma looks like.
Yep.
So it's, I think, such a powerful tool. And we watch this play out, I think, in the immediate aftermath. I love when the protesters went to the media outlets and said, look, we're going to hold you accountable too. We need representation of people who look like us to tell these stories. Because at the end of the day, what ends up happening is you can't help but translate in the voice that you're born into. One of the things that I love, you gave a powerful TED Talk, Eliza, that I've watched several times. And you began by talking about Frederick Douglass and the importance of recognizing that in the context of what Douglass said, struggle is inevitable.
Yeah.
But you have to frame that struggle for each successive generation, because every generation writes its own history, tends to see the past in the foreshortened perspective of its own present. And so that becomes a powerful tool for helping us all think about what we need to do in the process of dismantling systemic racism and, to your point, building community.
Yes.
And Dr. Yoher, what I'm thinking about too is you have just said in a very different way that this work of social justice, this work of diversity and inclusion is lifelong, right? Like we need to continue the story and the narrative for the kids that are born, for the next kids that are born, for the next, right? To keep creating the progression and the change, right? And to also get us through the additional progress that needs to be made.
Exactly.
Very true.
Yeah, thank you. So police violence against police, or Black people, excuse me, has been pandemic for generations. Can you speak to the opportunity for change in policing and public safety and the challenges of the road ahead? Can you speak to that?
I can start. And it's funny because I know it seemed like it was a slip up when you said police violence against police, but that's a real thing. So I do just want to throw that out there, you know, and even when I was thinking about Officer Chauvin and his knee on the neck of Brother George Floyd, knowing that cameras were watching, knowing that people were going to see it, to me, it did feel like it might have been an attack on Chief Arredondo. And I always center a lot of my conversations on Chief Arredondo, because when we talk about transformation and change, I don't know how we can talk about it not talking about Chief Arredondo, right? A Black man who is not just Black, because I like to say all of your skin folk aren't your kinfolk, right? And just because you have melanin does not mean that you have the best interests of Black people. But Chief Arredondo is a very conscious Black man that does have the best interests of Black people, and who has been discriminated even himself against this department and has had to file a lawsuit and won that lawsuit. And so when we talk about transformation, I don't know if there's anybody who really understands it better than Chief Arredondo, right? And I want to be clear about that, because I think a lot of the time we like to undermine Black people in leadership. And I want to be clear that I'm always attacking the institution and the system, and definitely not Chief Arredondo, because I think we can do two things at one time. What they say, you can walk and eat at the same time. So with Chief Arredondo, he is someone that makes me feel safer living in Minnesota. And that's a real fact. I always tell them, if you're not the chief no more, I'm leaving. Like, the day that you're not the chief is the day that I leave Minnesota, because—
Can we talk first before you leave?
Right, we could talk, but if Chief leave, I'm leaving, okay? But I think that's real. But then I can also acknowledge, one, the history of policing, right? And slave patrols and how that's how they still operate, right? Me and Dr. Yahuru Williams were just talking, and I was showing him a video of my interaction just yesterday with a police officer that walked over super aggressive with shades on, putting on his black gloves like he was about to put on an execution, and yelling a grown 40-year-old black man last name like he was a child, right? And me trying to educate him on this is not how you engage people, right? And so, again, two things can exist at one time. The police officers have been terrorizing, occupying, and brutalizing our community for far too long, and enough is enough, right? And I'll need people who are watching this who maybe live in the suburbs to understand that when people are talking about defunding the police, they're talking about the exact communities that you live in, right? Because the police are already defunded in your communities. Those resources go into your school systems and playgrounds and everything else, right? That's all people are talking about, is not having, when I'm in North Minneapolis, I see police officer after police officer, squad car after squad car. And when I'm in rural areas, I don't see that, right? And so if we're having more interaction with them, and I'll give one more example, then I'll pass it on to my brothers. But I remember I had a friend who was driving my car, and I'm sitting right beside him, and we get pulled over in North Minneapolis. And you know me, I've been getting more and more irritated. So I asked him, like, what did you even pull us over for in the first place? And he's like, you know, just calm down. But I'm like, I'm curious though. And they said it was my St. Thomas parking meter, like my St. Thomas parking pass. And I said, are you joking? I drive around with this pass every single day.
Yeah.
And so I need people to understand that your experiences with the police are not identical as our experiences with the police. Even Black women and Black men don't have the same experiences with police, right? And that's something very important for people to understand, is that they really are slave patrols when it comes to the Black communities, and they are protectors of business owners and white people and white communities, and we really need to bridge the gap.
Yes, yes. Leslie, you brought a story. Well, I was about your age, in North Minneapolis, lived there. Was on my way on 94 off of Dowling Avenue, and in the turn lane, which no longer is a turn lane, by the way, but it was when I was that age, I got pulled over and was given a ticket. I fought it and won. I was happy. But right, you know, what gives me a connection back to that story, that I was unjustly pulled over.
Right.
So, yes. Eliza, do you want to respond?
I'm keeping with the anecdotes. You know, right in North Minneapolis, myself, that was a point in which, in a 1 year, I had to go and actually testify. Nakima Libby Armstrong asked me to come and speak to the city council, because there was a point in which, in a 1 year time span, I had been pulled over 11 times, right? You know, 11 times. And I was telling them an example of one of the times in which I was pulled over. You know, I was behind my wife at the time, and I honked my horn at her as we was turning. And so she turned, I turned, and all of a sudden I get lit up from behind. And I'm like,
What's going on?
I can't imagine doing anything wrong, because, you know, we just started driving. I just turned, tags are good, everything is good. So I
Check.
Everything was check. Turn on the lights when he come up, and I'm like, so why'd you pull me over? He said, did you just honk at that car? I said,
Oh, gosh.
you mean my wife? He said, wait, that's your wife? I said, yeah. He said, that is your wife. I said, wait a minute, time out. So the most important tidbit of information with this exchange that we're having right now is whether or not the car, because she pulled over with me as they were pulling me over, whether or not the car in front of me is my wife, and not like the fact that you pulled me over and I'm trying to figure out, why am I pulled over?
How'd I get here?
So then he said something to the fact of, well, your brake lights was out. So then I started hitting on him, and I see both are lighting up in his windshield. He's like, stop hitting on them, stop hitting on them. I said, you said that they're out. I'm looking at, I'm seeing that they're not. Why am I pulled over, right? This is an example of one of the 11 times, right? And I just became frustrated and really aggravated. So my aggravation began to rise with each successive pullover, right? Which actually becomes more dangerous for me
Exactly.
because now, I'm likely to potentially exacerbate the situation out of pure frustration,
Yep.
right? Many people in these suburbs that President Leslie was just talking about, they don't have to worry about being, they can go their whole life and not be pulled over. I already don't have that experience.
Right.
I already cannot go my whole life because I've been pulled over countless times. I can't even count on all my hands and all my feet at this point. Right? And I've only had 3 tickets, by the way.
Yeah.
And so that means all of the other times, right? I wasn't ticketed, right? I was checked,
You were just
right?
pulled
I
over.
was exact. Well, not even a warning. They couldn't warn me for nothing, right? I was just checked, right? So they're tapping on me, letting me know that they're there, right? And so I'm just going to give an anecdote, right, of the pure frustration, right, that we feel. And so when we talk about defunding, we're talking about reallocating those resources. If there's somebody in a mental health crisis, we don't need police officers responding to that call. If someone has a cat trapped in a tree, we don't need police officers to come and respond to that call. We need the police department right size, and we need them responding to the proper call, and we need the other proper entities responding to other calls. And if and when there is a necessity for them to have additional backup to come, well, then they can call for that. But if in a mental health crisis, in the mental health institutions, there aren't police officers, there's mental health workers. And then if they need help, then they have other mental health workers, right? Who deal with whatever scenarios ultimately come up. And they're quite accustomed to dealing with that. And so it's not necessary for us to have armed police officers to respond to someone who's having a mental health crisis, right? So we're talking about right-sizing our police department and making sure that they don't even want to respond to these calls for service that don't really require a police officer response.
Applying teams where they're needed, right? Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm not going to add much. I think you both covered it beautifully. James Baldwin wrote back in the 1960s, the only way to police the ghetto is to be oppressive, even if that ghetto only exists in the minds of the officers who are patrolling. So the challenge for us is that I can be out in the suburbs at a reasonable time of night getting groceries and have an officer come up on me, and the expectation is I don't belong. That was the challenge with Trayvon Martin, even though we're not talking about the police in that case, but it's white people policing public space, and then having a tool in the form of the police to call to reinforce what Leslie accurately described as this kind of white supremacist realm that you live in, where I had a piece a couple of months ago on The Talk, and I got hate mail from people who said, oh, what is this talk stuff? I tell my kids to respect the police. You might talk to your children about how to speak to the police, but I talk to my children about how to survive what may become a deadly encounter by virtue of a history and a legacy of these types of encounters. Eliza, you put your finger right on it. The police have become a stand-in for so much in communities of color, and we need to talk about it. I lived in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and I remember there was a wild animal in my backyard. I can't recall what it was. Whatever it was, I'd never seen it before. So
Didn't belong there.
And I'm a city boy, so I was and I called the police, and the police says, well, here's the number to animal control. I said, animal control? See, the problem with communities of color is it's always the police for minor infractions, for things that in no way should involve. And you can't ask a hammer to do anything other than be a hammer. And when they come to the scene, they behave in a way that often escalates the feelings of anxiety that people have because they know what the response is going to be.
That poor little animal make one false move.
Exactly. But they'll end up, when the police come, they're going to have a longer conversation. I love the anecdote you provided because it's a great example. They'll have a longer conversation with me about what I'm doing there. And I'm the one that called you and asked you to come deal with the situation. I'm a big fan of talking about historical recovery. So when I ask people to consider for a fact that when you look at the history of African Americans in this country, why did the Garvey movement in the 1920s talk about armed self-defense? Why can we go back to 1884 and Frederick Douglass is talking about armed self-defense? Why is Paul Cuffey talking about armed self-defense? Why is the Black Panther Party in 1966 talking about armed self-defense? It's because there is this very, not powerful perception, but reality for people who live in communities of color that police aren't there to serve and protect. They are there to occupy space in the way that an army occupies territory. People get very destabilized by that narrative, but they don't live that reality. And the challenge for, I think, activists sometimes is getting people in a space where finally, because I don't understand why Philando Castile didn't do it. I don't understand why Daniel Pantalano choking out Eric Garner didn't do it. But I don't think anybody could walk away from Derek Chauvin after watching all those minutes tick by and say, you know, the police officers are good people.
Right.
And that's not, and I watched Leslie interact with an officer yesterday in an encounter, and she says to the officer, we recognize that you have a difficult job to do. No one in communities of color is saying that we don't want police. What we want is service. And there's a very different narrative when we're talking about serve and protect as opposed to occupy and contain. We don't need to be occupied and contained. We need to be treated in the same way other citizens are. That's a conversation at its core about American democratic practice and the way that you treat human beings, which should be a cornerstone of how we talk about democracy. But in most times when it comes to communities of color, we're seen out of that conversation.
Right, right. At 8 minutes, I always get to 8 minutes. You can actually do a yoga segment. I don't know if you're aware. On, I won't say the app, but 11 minutes, right? You can do a yoga segment in 11 minutes. That's better condition for a human being than what happened in the 8 minutes for George Floyd. Thank you. So we're in this clear, really time of reckoning with Americans, racism that is going on in past and present that we've talked about. What is distinctive about this moment in time in the history of anti-Blackness and resilient organized change? What are the distinctive elements of opportunities that can help create the way forward? And where should our energy be focused?
So with my Don't Complain, Activate framework, we have 3 C's of activation. You all can take out your pen and paper right now, okay? So it's communication, collaboration, and compassion, right? Kendrick Lamar once said, communication builds relations. And I believe that, right? I think, unfortunately, we still live in very segregated communities. We're not talking to each other. We're talking at each other. I'm a big person in believing that conversation actually could change the nation, right? And us being able to have better understanding about each other's experiences and knowing the difference. I also think that collaboration is key. One of my professors, he once said that people like to do business with people they know, they like, and they trust, right? And we have to start getting to know each other, right? One of the things that Al Sharpton said at Brother George Floyd's memorial was that now what he sees being a huge difference is the amount of white people coming out in massive numbers, standing side by side with their Black brothers and sisters, saying we shall overcome. And when we say we, we're talking about humanity, right? And reshaping this narrative that it's not Black people against white people, it's everyone against white supremacy. And I think when we think at it from that angle, we get a better understanding of really what the issue is and that we are all allies in this, right? And then the final C, which is the most important, is compassion. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, he talked about how darkness cannot draw darkness, only light could do that. And hate cannot draw hate, only love can do that. And if you know me, I'm a real love child. I try to lead with love, right? Because I believe that a lot of the time why people are unable to show compassion is because we don't show it to ourselves. If I don't have something, I can't give it to you, right? And so I really urge us all, I know we live in a very capitalist society that teaches us to be individualistic, but right now we need each other. And it's okay for us to be vulnerable, and it's okay to say what we don't know, and it's okay to ask for help, right? And it's okay to show people love and compassion and recognize that we all are hurting in some fashion or form. And, you know, we were talking yesterday about Professor Okati and how he told me that the good thing about darkness is that it makes it easier for the lights to find each other, right? And unfortunately, it seems to be getting darker and darker, but I'm so thankful that the lights of the world, you know, we're able to find each other and to communicate, collaborate, and be compassionate.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And the love, right, to me sits at the core and the foundation of that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie. Eliza?
I mean, what can I add to that? I mean, sometimes you can just let an answer stand.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, again, this is a finishing season, you know, and us just making sure that we are unwilling to allow things to go back to business as usual. This has to be stated. This this has to be a rallying call. This has to be a mantra. We're not going back, period. Like, we're just not going back. And so, because that's the fact, you know, really framing up and really messaging out strong, and really helping that message ring through deep into, you know, the spaces and the place, and it is ringing very much through into spaces and places where we typically aren't. Right? I'm seeing clips of sons arguing with dads, you know, in the Appalachian Mountains, saying, "Dad, what you just said was racist." And the mom is like, "Yeah, Dad's not a racist." And the dad's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna kick you out. I'm not racist." And the son's like, "No, Dad, it's racist and I'm not standing for it." And I'm watching this clip and I'm feeling just outstanding, right? Because we ain't going back. None of us. Leslie said that this isn't a black and a white. This is all of us. This generation very clearly sending a clear signal to this nation that whatever had been is over and we're not going back. And so really rallying around that understanding, right? Empowering yourself with that understanding. Take your courage from that understanding as you move in these spaces that, you know what, I'm moving the way that I'm moving because we ain't going back, right? And so I would say that.
Yeah, and Eliza, you know, the whole idea of getting the understanding, and then if I connect it back to what Leslie was saying in terms of not attacking the person, but the system, right? If we can recognize that we all have bias, and bias is a part of our decision making, and sometimes bias interferes with our ability to make the right decisions. Those are the biases that we want to put to the side. Those are the ones that we want to take out of the system, right? And get an understanding that this is about a human collective effort to take bias out where it's not needed and where it's creating harm. If we can get that understanding.
And I would say those are the biases that we will, right? Like very action oriented, like we will get that out. It is going to happen when it presents itself, when it materializes, we will move on it and we will eradicate it.
That's right, in a very collaborative way. Yeah. Dr. Yoru.
I don't know how to build on
I know, right?
Two, except to say, because I love where you wound up, Eliza. It's a lot of people are reading Ibram Kendi, and they love how to be an anti-racist. And I talk to people who've had trainings, and they're doing Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility. And I'm going to go back to what Leslie said, because at the core, this is not difficult. How do you be an anti-racist? Be a human. A human being cannot watch another human being in pain and not feel in some sense compelled to want to alleviate that pain, to eliminate that trauma, to elevate that spirit. We look at our faith communities, I think, as a beacon sometimes in this process for talking about things that we deem to be spiritual, which at their core are also political. I don't want anyone to be suffering in an airtight cage of poverty, as Dr. King put it, because that in and of itself diminishes our capacity as a community to live up to our highest standards. When you look at it in that way, this isn't just about reforming the individual. This is how we can become a better society in the process. I love what you said too, because I think about the civil rights movement where in 1966, after Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee kicked the whites out of the organization, and a lot of white activists were upset and they said, "We don't understand, we've been here with you, we've been marching with you." And what leaders like Stokely Carmichael and others said is, "We appreciated your service, but the problem is that you want to come south where you think the problem is. We need you to go back to Michigan. We need you to go back to New York. We need you to go back to Pittsburgh. Talk to your families, talk to your professors, talk to your teachers about dismantling there, because it's the blind eye that they turn to acts of racial terror that ultimately help to perpetuate racial terror." It's a huge point, because I think at this moment we're watching this. At the same time, I think that we have to be very targeted in pointing people in the direction of what it is we need to dismantle. John Lewis in July told us one of these big areas, which is voting. People need to register. We need to focus on exercising our constitutional right to vote and eliminating barriers to voting, including felony disfranchisement, changing of polling places, and gerrymandering, which remain major issues in our society and culture. Beyond that, I get tired of allies asking me, what is it that I can do? What's your industry? Because whatever your industry is, you got a pathway for action tomorrow. You know, I can look out my back door and recognize there are things in my community that I can change that are ultimately unfair or discriminatory by virtue of the fact that I shop at this Cub Food, or I live in it, or I see the way, and calling that action out. But I think it goes back to the core of what you said, which is this: no one should have to tell you how to be an anti-racist if you are privileging all humanity. Right. Don't come with all lives matter or blue lives matter unless you recognize at the core that we should be paying attention where the wound is and where the trauma is. And if you were truly human, something in your soul should drive you to want to deal with the harm and not talk about what could be first.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Yes. And just to add to your boil down, right? Focus on being human. And we all invest in different ways, right? Like we go to the grocery store at a bare minimum to invest our money to buy the groceries that we need to feed ourselves. So investment is another aspect that can help us focus and think about where do we invest our time, our money, and our energy. Thank you.
Amen.
So I want to thank you all. We do have questions that are going to be coming up from our audience. And so for a great conversation that we've had, I want to thank you for that. And at this moment, I'd like to really open up the conversation and invite the audience members to really ask us questions as well. It looks like we do have some questions. We've received them, and there are a few already that have came up, and I'm sure there'll probably be more to come. To get us started, I'm just going to pull off the top. Do you believe that Minneapolis City Council is doing enough to transform public safety for Minneapolis residents? If so, why? If not, what should they be doing? Anyone?
Don't ask me. You want y'all answer.
I saw you put your head down, Leslie.
It's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wait for Leslie to answer it first, though.
No, I was serious. That wasn't one of those moments.
Okay.
I was serious. Go ahead.
It's not a simple question because, people like Leslie and myself, we're doing a lot of work with the city council, and, there's relationships there that we want to make sure that we are actualizing and be able to get the things done that we want to get done. But quite frankly, the city council could be done much, much more outreach, boots on the ground, and actually talking to the people, having much more publicized public type of hearings out in the community, super accessible, asking people, what do they believe? Where do they stand? Like really becoming really transparent with the process. A lot of what we have seen implemented had been ideations and thoughts that had come back from yesteryear, as opposed to really centralizing the people's voice now. What do the people want, right? And so I would say that, there are some council members that are pretty ardent in making sure that they're hearing the voices of the people. More certainly can. And I think the more that they see, when you are going down the labyrinth of government, there's a certain level of insulation that comes with that, and quite frankly, certain levels of disconnect that comes with that. Even, as you are an activist or an organizer, as you are, matriculating upward and like really beginning to kind of disappear backwards in the back halls, negotiating on behalf of community, there is a potential for a disconnect to happen there as well, even if you're calling yourself a grassroots organizer or a grassroots activist. And so because of that, it's really necessary to break out of that bubble and to make sure that you are really hearing the voices of the people and not echo chambers, not just from like activist groups and organizing groups that got access to you, but like, what are the people saying? That's challenging because a lot of the times people don't put enough stock in the voices and the will of the people. And to me, I believe in people power. I believe that community needs to be centralized in all decision making. I don't see any pathway forward outside of community voice being centralized. And so that's a real convoluted way to answer that question, I know.
But you did. Thank you.
You did well. I'm just gonna add a little bit so I don't say too much. Okay. There's a saying, men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie, but they can be misleading, right? And everything in Minnesota is misleading. There are a lot of white progressive agendas at play right now that are trying to benefit from the oppression and suffrage of Black people in Minnesota, which I truly have an issue with. Another thing that I have an issue with that I would urge you all to talk to your city council members about is ask them when the last time they reached out to Chief Arredondo was, right? Through all of these conversations, I know, because I talk to Chief Arredondo all the time, and I've said this to numerous city council members and people who are leading, defund the police camp. is how are you having these conversations and not even having a conversation? I'm not saying that we all have to agree on everything, but you're not even picking up the phone to call him. There's a huge disconnect and disregard for Black people, for Black leadership. When I helped to host a community memorial for Brother George Floyd on the North Side, Chief Redondo stole the show. He was like the community celebrity because people knew that Chief Redondo actually comes from the community and cares about the community, right? So we're at a very unique place in Minnesota, and I really urge all of you well-intended white people to dig deeper, to go below the surface. And I know that it's challenging, but I believe in you all. So do the work and ask your city council members the hard questions.
Thank you. You want to, all right. Enough said.
You don't touch perfection.
That's right. There's two really good questions in front of us, and I'm having a hard time deciding, but I'm going to mix with, would you like to respond to today's news from Kentucky, where a grand jury really brought forward no charges against Louisville police for Breonna Taylor's death?
Definitely will want to hear from Leslie first on this one.
You were on the ground there. I'd love to.
You know, I think it's very triggering because, you know, we were talking about this earlier. I really feel like it's like Jamar Clark, you know, like they're where we were 5 years ago. And I know what it feels like not to get justice, right? And I know the hardship that the people in Kentucky were already going through. And I think it's going to be a huge hit to people. It is a huge hit to people, not just in Kentucky, but there are going to be protests all over the nation. We're going to be at the Capitol tonight at 6 p.m. right here in Minnesota. You know, again, I want us to humanize people and to realize that a real life was lost. An essential worker was lost, right? And don't complain, activate. Figure out what industry you're in and see how you can make the change, right? See how we can change the policies, the laws. Also, I don't want you all to pity the people in Louisville because they are very intelligent. They are very capable. They've already been banning no-knock warrants and they've been active, right? And so just figure out how you can help and support them. And then also figure out how you can help and support the work in Minnesota because it's more than enough work that needs to be done. And people who are really suffering and are really struggling. Again, you know, we got rid of grand jury situations in the case of police-involved shootings here in Minnesota because we've seen how ineffective they are. And I think that's going to be the next step for Louisville. Again, I think they are where we were 5 years ago. And so I just have so much compassion, so much empathy. And I also am triggered because I remember how I felt when there was no justice for Jamar Clark.
What you said, and we talked yesterday, was so compelling to me because I went to Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 after Mike Brown was killed with the National Alliance for Faith and Justice. And you're there working with kids in Ferguson, Florissant, which look like suburbs, but aren't suburbs because what you've done is transferred the inequality to these apparently suburban spaces, which ultimately are vectors for the continuation of inequality, police practices that are predatory, housing practices that are predatory. But when I saw that today, it reminded me of, I mean, I just had that feeling that I had in the aftermath of Ferguson, where how many more Ferguson reports do we need? And in fact, the Ferguson report was 198 pages or something like that. And Black Lives Matter reduced that to a hashtag, which sums up the Ferguson report. Black Lives Matter. When do we get to a point where somebody looks at the circumstances in a particular community and says, as Eliza pointed out earlier, you can indict a plate, at least make the point of communicating to the community that at the core you recognize that a life was lost and someone needs to be accountable.
Right.
The big challenge for activists in this space is accountability. People don't hear that. We wanted Daniel Pantalano to be accountable. We want George Floyd's murderers to be accountable, not just Officer Chauvin, but in the aftermath, and I love what the city council did, but the reality is everyone has a duty, is a mandated reporter and a duty to respond in that moment.
Yeah.
And when do we get to points where, and this is why your point is so powerful to me, Leslie, because I think you're right. Communities are in different spaces. And I do believe, I think your analysis is dead on. They're 5-6 years behind. I had an elderly gentleman tell me once, some of the best advice I ever got is that a wise person learns from their elders so they don't have to make the same mistakes, I'd be looking heavily at, which is why we want to stay here and do this work in Minneapolis and St. Paul right now, so you don't replicate, you know, the trauma to your community, because ultimately that's what's going to happen, and you're going to learn that hard lesson, and you're going to be asking why. I think back to a final point here, Muhammad Ali's funeral. And one of the first celebrities to don a hoodie in support of Trayvon Martin was Muhammad Ali, suffering from Parkinson's. And I love Pat Begley. They ran an editorial on him in the New York Times, but Pat Begley, the cartoonist, did a great cartoon on him where he says, Ali was the greatest not because he was the champ. He was the greatest because he was always the challenger. Wake up in the morning and find a way to be the challenger. These prosecutors have to be challengers. They have to make the system work. Activists are already in the space challenging. And when people ask questions about allyship, I'm a proud member of the YWCA St. Paul. I thought I understood housing. When I went to Ferguson and they were 98% free and reduced lunch and how I grew up, going through those spaces with Nikki and Dina over there where they're walking you through the housing program and you go, you know, homelessness and housing, residential segregation in Minnesota looks different than Connecticut. Be the challenger in that space. Policing, we can be talking about a national problem, but it's got its own flavor here. Be a challenger in that space. We have to embrace what it means to be the challengers.
Yeah.
Right, that's right.
Yes.
I'd like to add, as we were talking about what can be done, how would you inform or advise, one of the questions says, young children to really help engage in this work? The next generation, how do we advise them?
Well, I'm gonna speak to the Breonna Taylor question. It was really tough for me. Yeah, I was one of the first people to really begin hearing about something happening down in Louisville. I contacted my local ACLU. I said, "Have you guys heard about this?" No. Oh, seems pretty suspect. We probably need to really be digging into what is this. I contacted all of the media outlets.
The tourists down there, yeah, with the ACLU.
They were like, Dad, nothing. I'm like, you guys aren't reporting on this? It seems like a really significant situation. It seems buried. Wouldn't you, I know that the call letters, KTS, I was like, shouldn't you all be reporting on this? This seems, really bad. And it seems like something really wrong. I didn't have all the information, but just what I had on the surface, it seemed bad, and it was really frustrating, the lack of urgency, the lack of response, the lack of knowledge of what potentially had happened. So then when the energy really began to galvanize and more information came out, this day is really hard because, I'm pretty intimately familiar with the details. I know the officer could have had cover, did have cover after the initial rounds were fired, took cover and then made a determination to shoot multiple rounds through a window frame that had a curtain pulled across it, which means that this officer couldn't identify a threat, which means this officer shot blindly. So the police chief, the interim police chief down there said, he was, quote unquote, shocked that this particular officer used deadly force in this manner. This police chief terminated this officer because he said he cannot believe this officer chose to use deadly force in this manner. And so today, I'm looking at a situation in which I have, an attorney general, gallivanting around, with, on Republican platforms. And I know this is not partisan, but intimating, what he thought was going to ultimately happen anyway. Like he was intimating what he thought was going to happen anyway. And so I'm hearing this and now my heart is pumping because I'm praying that based off of this very basic information, this guy shot through a window with the curtain pulled. He should have been indicted. And you can indict a paper plate, right? If you want to indict a paper plate, you can indict a paper plate with very little. The bar for indictment is very, very, very low, right? And so the fact that that didn't happen, and I just learned it a few hours ago, it's heavy for me.
Yeah.
Right? It's heavy for me because I know that these are humans acting, right, in this particular way, right? And it feels so personal, to me, incredibly intensely personal. I'm glad to hear that there's an action tonight at 6. When Leslie said that, that made me feel better. I already knew tonight at 6, I know where I'm gonna be. I need to be there. I have to be there, right? But this is tough. This isn't easy at all. I was glad to hear what the professor was saying regarding, be a challenger. These people are elected. Let us be clear. These are elected positions. The AG is an elected position. The city attorney is an elected position. I forget the name of the, it's not a district attorney, but it's something akin to a district. I call that office at the time, right? All of these are elected positions, which means, okay, y'all got us this time. But we are engaged in the political process in ways that have shocked and amazed people here in Minnesota, right? We understand the nuances and the intricacies of the political process. We speak in fluent political discourse now in ways that we hadn't before. We wasn't in those spaces, in those places. We campaign managers around here now, right? We can run convention floors now. We know how to caucus now. We know the rules of the DFL and even of the RNC. We know these now, right? And so they got us this time, but there will be a reckoning. And so I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Eliza.
Can I just say, and then I'll go to the question that you asked about the kids. I just want people to know.
Back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh.
but for people that don't know, I was one of the Louisville 87, I believe it was 87 of us that got arrested for protesting on Daniel Cameron's lawn. And so the fact that I have a court date and these officers don't, that's profound. Right? And Daniel Cameron pushed for us to get a felony charge that has now been dropped, thank God. But the energy and urgency he had to charge peaceful protesters, but he didn't keep that same energy when it came to these officers. That is profound. So when Eli is saying if they wanted an indictment, they would have gotten one, I really hope that you all are understanding what he's meaning. And I just think that me having a court date in the office is not, it speaks volumes to that, right? I'll just say briefly about how to engage the young people. Don't complain, activate, DCA. Because I tell people, you don't have to be President Barack Obama or Beyonce in order to activate your community, right? You could be a teacher, you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, you could be an activist, right? There are so many forms of activation, you just need to choose one. And I think that we need to let young people really lead. I've been saying this a lot, especially during the pandemic when children have been home. Children have a lot of the answers. They're so pure, they're so authentic, they haven't been conditioned. And I would really urge parents not to allow the system to indoctrinate them, right? But allow them, when we talk about love, children are loved. They genuinely love each other until you all tell them not to. Till you all identify that their best friend is Black, right? I heard the stories when I was in law school of a lot of my colleagues that talk about how everything was great until they got to a certain age and their white counterparts started to realize that they were quote unquote different, right? And so I would really urge people to lean into love and activate your children by letting them lead the way. I've been seeing so many babies leading their baby protests and kid protests, and they have the answer. So I would say follow the children.
Yeah.
Slightly, I'm going to add to that, because I think that's beautiful and it's true. And I love what you said about this generation earlier. But I would say to teenagers in particular, people are fond of telling teenagers you stand on the shoulders of giants. I want to tell them a little secret that I learned from John Lewis. You don't stand on the shoulders of giants. You are the giants. Literally. But you have to learn what it takes in order to exercise the enormous power that you have. Because the Jesuits have a saying, they would like to tell young people in education, go forth and set the world on fire. I'm like, that's great advice, but it's a little dangerous because you can't tell people to go set the world on fire unless you tell them what to burn, right? And not that we want to be burning anything, but if you're going to talk about giants and power, focus your energies and attention on things that tend to divide, undermine, and create difference and trauma where there's no need for that to exist.
Right.
You put that in the hands of young people who have no fear about getting it done, where they don't come, because I think the older generation needs to hear be the challenger. The younger generation just needs to be told, you are the giants. Now go out there and make an impact. But we have to direct them in a way that it doesn't manifest itself in ways that are, and I think we have to talk about this, in their own way divisive. Cancel culture to me is a little bit of a problem. I need people to come home. I can't have people walking out of the conversation angry and waiting for their day of revenge. I need to figure out a way that when you do something, we deal with you as a community and we bring you home, because we need everybody to respect that Black Lives Matter and that we have to build a community of people who respect each other from that standpoint. So I can't be in a situation where it's tit for tat. I love what Eli said, because at the end of the day, but be rest assured, we will show up and hold you accountable. And as part of the re-education that needs to be done, we have to recognize that that's got to come from a place of love.
Yep.
That's right.
100%.
That's right.
100%.
We have one other question and time for it. What does it mean to move from allyship to solidarity? And how can white folks advance the movement, use their societal power for racial justice without co-opting it or taking away from it?
I'll be really succinct. To me, allyship is standing on the side and saying, it is really terrible what's happening to them. I'm with them with that pain. That's just not right. And to be someone who is a co-conspirator is to say, this is really terrible what's happening to us. We have to put a stop to it. That's the difference between them and us. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would urge you all to listen to Black people, listen to Black women. I think that it's going to be very important to understand that this is not your time to shine, right? And I've heard some white women say that. This is our time to take a seat and take direction. I like that energy, right? Because I think that it's important. And then also help the people who are on the front line, who have been putting in work, right? Like, I think that you all have a lot of resources, you have a lot of connections, you have a lot of power that can be leveraged if you all just lended it, right? So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Leslie.
Very brief, because I think you both covered it, but I love that idea of lending your power. So when you see something, when you stand up and you put a lot of attention on that wound, what you're communicating by your action, not by your words, not by your Facebook post, not by your tweet, but by your action, is that you are part and parcel of those that are seeking to find solutions and build bridges. An ally is the person that's standing next to me as we are walking on the lawn of the Attorney General. The Facebook posts are nice, but at the end of the day, they're not going to move the needle in terms of what we need to do. So you got to have some skin and investment in the game. And that means moving out of your comfort zone, as you mentioned earlier.
100%.
Right, right. Thank you so much. So I want to thank you all again, and everyone who has really participated in our conversation. Before we close, I would like to ask each of you one final question. Through all the work you've been doing, what has inspired you? What hope do you have? Or what has life been giving you in a time of such grief? So what hope, what inspire, and what has life been giving you in a time of such grief?
So, again, I just have to go back to what Professor Mahmoud El-Kati said to me about being in the darkness, the light, right? Dr. Williams and I, we weren't connected before this, right? And we are connected in this season. Tamika Mallory is my sister. Rhapsody came to Minnesota to build with young Black youth because of all of this happening. Just the other day, I think the young people really inspire me. When I was protesting early today, there were 3 young Black men out there. One was a football player. To see young athletes on the front line right now, right? To see athletes in the NBA and the NFL standing up, to see artists standing up. That's the moment I've been waiting for probably a decade. And I know you all thinking I'm young, but I started protesting a little over a decade ago, right?
Leslie, I have a feeling you had the sign when you came out.
I did. I honestly, my mother would tell you, I've been fighting the fight for a long time. But I'm very inspired by the young people. You know, we had a Books and Breakfast event last week, and to see the babies, there's so much light and so much love in them. They have not been told that they are less than human. They have not been brutalized. They have not been disenfranchised. They have not been indoctrinated. And that's what I fight for, the light that lives within inside of them, right? I fight for their light, and then I fight for our brothers and sisters like Mayan Burrell and Philip Vance and people who are in prison that shouldn't be, because their lights were stolen, like Eli's, at such a young age. So it's like those two extremes.
That's right.
That's what inspires me.
Thank you, Leslie.
I'm gonna jump in so that the professor can end. Cause he always have them great quotes. I gotta step my quote game up.
You want to take them like fun.
My Lord, I gotta.
That's what happens when you watch your TED Talk several times.
Nah,
you get inspired. Ready to go.
I gotta step my quote game up. Okay, mental note. The beauty in life is what inspires me. You know, I go and, you know, I trek around in the woods. I walk paths and trails and, you know, Theodore Worth Park, bird sanctuaries, all of that kind of stuff. This is a beautiful world. I go travel to places, you know, here and there, just, you know, soaking in the beauty of life. Life is beautiful, right? Yeah. And, you know, sometimes it can be a beautiful struggle. I am not gonna allow the enemy of love, truth, peace, freedom, and understanding to eradicate that out of my world or the world of those that I love.
Yeah.
And so the beauty of this life consistently inspires me. Yeah. The beauty of this that I see of nature and of people, right, and the power of people, right, consistently energizes me and inspires me. You know, it gives me wings, so to speak. And so I would just say the people, you know, and nature, you know, are my inspirations, you know, are what really help to, you know, because like I think about some of the brothers and some of the sisters when I was, because I went into prison at 15 years old. You know, they don't like set you off to the side and let you do push-ups and jumping jacks and get bigger and stronger. They put you in with the big boys immediately, you know, and them guys in there could have easily just gobbled me up. And, you know, they took me under their wing, trained me. I didn't go to high school, right? That was my high school. That was my college. That was my PhD. It's the brothers that poured so much of themselves inside of me, right? Humanity is a beautiful thing. And so, you know, I'm attracted to it. I get, you know, inspired by it. You know, I'm a quote person too. So when I'm hearing all them quotes, I'm like, yeah, I love us. That's what I love. I love us.
Thank you so much.
I'm reading a great
great
biography now on Malcolm X.
Yeah.
And I think about Eli in this sense. I love Malcolm. But there were moments in Malcolm's life where if things had gone differently, if people had invested in him differently, if people had interacted with him differently, maybe we'd be talking about Malcolm in the same way that we're talking about Dr. King as somebody who had a forecast that was very different. Society has as much responsibility in that equation as anyone else, because when Malcolm was there with the public schools and the public schools failed him, then they bear responsibility for that. That's the knee moments. At the same time, I think about it in this context. What's incredible about this moment is I've learned so much about myself as a human being in 3 very tangible ways. Leslie said one of them: elevate the voices of Black women. I think it's very easy for us in a national conversation about racism to forget patriarchy, and particularly the wound as it applies to women of color and Black women in particular. And I have been motivated, inspired, and moved. And for somebody who studies that history and knows the legacy of people like Ella Baker, to now be in the midst of a contemporary movement where you are introduced to these incredible women who never get covered in terms of the work they're doing, but they're doing the work, that inspires me. It makes me want to be a better teacher, activist, human being.
Right.
The second thing is really just being exposed to people like Eli and yourself, Tanya. Quite frankly, the work that I'm doing with YWCA St. Paul, the work that's happening here in Minneapolis with YWCA Minneapolis, combating racism and empowering women, because that's important work. But it's the same thing, and this is the third one. and I urge people not to do this. I've worked with some great corporate leaders, SPS Commerce and Ozzie Nelson from Nelson, but the message that I have for everyone here is this: don't get fatigued. It is now September. I'm glad we're having this panel because what will kill this movement is fatigue. When Eli and Leslie at some point are going to get tired, we need you there to take the ball and advance the next 10 yards so they can catch their breath and come back into the game so we can score.
Amen.
Fatigue is what kills movements. And the way that we build fatigue is by what I like to call historical amnesia. We can't remember what happened 20 years ago, let alone what happened 2 months ago or 2 weeks ago. Don't forget this moment. If you have all this energy in this moment, then remind yourself every day, even if it's something as extreme as having to sit down and watch that video, what this fight is all about.
Yeah.
Because once we give in to fatigue, what ends up happening is we say, we had our 1964 moment, 65, Voting Rights Act, everything's done. And then we watch the passing of a legend like John Lewis, and we have to have former President Barack Obama say, a fitting tribute to John Lewis would be to restore the passages we just wiped out of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in 2013. If history offers us any lesson, it is what John Lewis meant to say at the March on Washington, but which was edited out. All of us need to get in and stay in this movement to the very end. Or, to quote from my man Eli, something that I learned today, put a period at the end of this sentence. And let's say never again for anyone.
I love it. Yeah,
That's good.
absolutely. And you all inspire me. And I want to thank you for all that you have done. And I'm in this with you. And I am so proud to lead with you.
Thank you. You did a great
I will
job
do my part.
moderating. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, and I am honored to have been a part of it. Thank you for being a part of it. And thank again to Trish Jones for True Art Speak for opening our program. And thank you for all for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us for our third community town hall centering the Black lived experience, hosted by YWCA Minneapolis. I want to recognize and extend our appreciation to all of our panelists and our moderator, Dr. Tanya Hampton, for a powerful and dynamic discussion today. I also want to thank spoken word poet and educator Tish Jones for today's powerful opening. We hope that today's event has inspired us not just to talk about racial justice, but to actually take action to achieve lasting, measurable change towards racial justice. To that end, I want to extend an invitation to everyone to attend our next signature racial justice event. Coming up on October 21st is It's Time to Talk. This annual event fosters a space for racial justice engagement for everyone, wherever they are on their racial justice journey. Thank you so much.